Welcome to Family Addiction Coaching, a podcast about families supporting a loved one with addiction. Each episode will provide insight into a real family's experience, what families find useful and not, what is available in the community, and what would help make their journey easier. Similar to what happens in our coaching service, we'll discuss how families have encouraged their loved one into recovery, as well as their own family recovery. We'll also discuss harm reduction, an especially useful approach for those with no current interest in recovery. I'm your host, Patrick Doyle of Family Addiction Coaching. With a master's degree in social work, I'm licensed by the state of Massachusetts and comply with the strict code of ethics of the National Association of Social Workers.
Patrick, what are some actionable steps that family members can take right now that you would recommend for improving their relationship with their loved one who's struggling? Like, what's one tool above all others that you think is a lifesaver?
Really great question, Amanda. Self-care. It's all about self-care. It's so important that family members start thinking about taking care of their health, taking care of their welfare and their safety and their security, including their financial security, and also their satisfaction in life, their happiness. It's so important to get gratification from life and have some enjoyment and have a balance between working hard, whether it's a job or helping your family member or your loved one, versus having your own life as well, doing things that make you feel good. Too often the families have become so wrapped up and preoccupied with issues related to active addiction that they usually lose sight of their own needs. If a family can turn that perspective around just to look at themselves, to figure out what do I need to do to give me more satisfaction in life, more happiness, to make me feel good about my life, what can I do to accomplish that? It could involve exercise, it could involve nutrition or healthy eating, pursuing hobbies like the arts, reading, or creating something, taking a course, taking a class purely for fun. If you do nothing else, chances are you will improve your own life by focusing more on that self-care. And chances are you'll also end up improving the life of your family and your loved ones.
It helps to find things to be grateful for, too. Yeah, I mean, it creates a feeling in the home that's lighter and more hopeful and more laughter and trust. I mean, it helps if you're grateful and you can both or all of the family trust in a future, because you can feel that and it keeps you going. You know, I mean, I believe it also helps you decide which path to take along the way when you just are focusing on things to be grateful for. I mean, heavier paths can easily burn everybody out, and you typically don't achieve the results that you're aiming for anyway. It's just a heavy emotional burden type of feeling.
Yeah, what we see in families is that virtually all of their communication involves addiction or the consequences of the active addiction. So that's all they talk to the person with the addiction about. They're not talking about sports or about life. All they're talking about is the addiction. Once you get into some type of recovery from the addiction, it's so important to develop a quality of life. In other words, you have to have something to stay healthy for. If you don't have something in your life that makes staying healthy worthwhile, it's really hard to continue at your efforts at staying healthy.
Yeah.
So we have to, for example, people have to have housing, they have to have jobs, they have to have relationships, they have to feel socially connected, they need support, they need hope. They need something that reinforces all the hard work that they have to go through, especially in early sobriety. In a similar kind of way, it's also true for the families. The families need to have a reason to get up and get out of bed in the morning and fight the good fight for another day. And that's something that I don't think we focus on enough, certainly not for the person with the addiction, even more so for the families, because we never talk about family recovery.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I know that when I was in early recovery, even though I was really open about it and talked about it a lot, I didn't like feeling like, okay, I got to go back home now. And now everybody's going to focus on my sobriety and how I'm doing. And they're going to be paying attention to, if I'm dozing off at the table, or am I making sense, or am I late? I mean, it's a lot to carry, and especially when you already feel guilty inside about what you're putting your family through. It's, I would think that it makes a lot of people tend to avoid family situations.
Yeah, absolutely. One family that I've been working with for 3 years or so, now their loved one is not interested in complete abstinence from alcohol. They've tried the pushing abstinence approach. They've tried making abstinence part of their plan for financial support. That didn't work well. This person at this point in time is not ready to go for abstinence. So rather than be talking about abstinence and have you been drinking, whatever, they find it helpful to talk about movies. The person with the addiction and his mom, they both really enjoy movies. And they enjoy talking about the Oscars and trying to see as many Oscar films as they can, and then talking about the Oscar broadcast. And so they've got this shared hobby about watching movies. I think it's so positive that they do have that they can talk about, and they are able to find a way to enjoy that. And it doesn't mean that her son is necessarily out of the woods in terms of risks from problematic use. It gives them something else to talk about and to bond over and to remember, to have some good times. And we also talk a lot about harm reduction with craft. Harm reduction basically means doing what one can to reduce the likelihood of a person with addiction coming to harm. So basically trying to keep them safe, making sure that they have, food, that they have a certain amount of money that they need to live on, in the hopes that they will live to fight another day, and that as time goes by, they will figure out other ways of dealing with things than their substance use, or maybe they'll gain some matter of control over it. It helps people develop their relationship with each other when the family stops insisting upon abstinence, but recognizes that it's really up to the individual whether they're going to go for abstinence or not. And that the best the family can do is to support any kind of positive behavior, positive progress, positive effort. And that it helps improve the relationship. It takes away the criticizing and the nagging and the pleading or the crying. And it gives them more and more opportunities to have a good feeling. It feels good to people to give other people compliments in general. And it feels good to receive compliments from others. So by sharing compliments, and like you mentioned, Amanda, that expressing gratitude, that really does help bring people closer together without such a singular focus on, are you using, are you not, or are you in treatment, or are you not?
Right. And I think a lot of people don't even take into consideration that there are other options. Like, somebody doesn't have to be completely abstinent. I think it's up
Right.
to the person in recovery or with addiction or whatnot to figure out, what does recovery look like to them, and how does the family feel about that. And, I think it helps to also create like an idea of what you're working towards, like as a goal, because otherwise it's kind of an endless journey, but if you can like set small goals to reach, like, okay, they have housing now, they're safe. Okay, they have a job, okay, they're making healthier decisions, like those are small little goals to reach. And you can also, express the gratitude, and it keeps a lot of hope along the way. Just small things like that. Somebody doesn't have to be completely abstinent and working full time and doing all these things that they might have been doing before. Just small improvements are nice. Just healthier decisions are nice.
Yeah. There's one individual who I was working with as a coach, and that individual was trying to stop substance use. And we met for 5-6 sessions over the course of 5 or 6 weeks. And that person was telling me that he was abstinent and that he was having a struggle, but he was feeling okay. Well, then the seventh week came along, and he reported that he had not been abstinent, that he had been using the substance throughout our sessions, throughout our meetings. And my response to that was, thank you so much for telling me that. I really appreciate hearing that. And I can only imagine how difficult that must be for you to admit.
Yeah.
Because it's like the longer you go on with deception, it's like digging a hole deeper and deeper. It becomes harder and harder to say, help, I'm in a hole, or even just say, sorry, but I've not been truthful to you. I've been using all along. So I commended him for that. And I said, maybe that might be the most positive action that I've seen you take in all of our sessions. And good for you. And how did you get whatever you call it to voice that? And that's just incredible. And so for that individual, the being able to be honest and truthful with his use was something that he needed to work on with my help, but also within himself. And he was shocked when I gave him that kind of reaction, because any other time with any other kind of support or treatment, if he were to say that, he would be kicked out.
Right.
Yeah. And I said, no, why would I kick you out? You have told me a truth that you have been unable to admit for several weeks now. And now I see this as a huge accomplishment. And I mean, that's terrific. And it was really fascinating to see him. Over the phone, I could see him relax. I couldn't really see him, but I could feel him relax and feel more comfortable. And so the work that we continued to do from there was to support his autonomy, his making his own choices as to what he's going to do, and me helping him examine that without any kind of judgment or any kind of direction, really, but just bearing witness and helping him in that struggle to figure out what he wanted to do, because that's took him time to figure out.
Yeah, it's really freeing for somebody also.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what people say. And again, it's such a different experience for them than what they are usually encountering. And I also have that story. Can I tell you the story?
Yeah, you tell a story.
Okay.
Do you want me to ask a question to lead you into it, or you just want to go right into it?
Well, let's see. Where was my story going to be?
It was going to be, because I was going to ask, how can families navigate the resistance and barriers they get from treatment programs? I didn't get to ask that question.
Yeah, let's do that, because that's a great question.
Yeah, I really wanted to ask that. So
yeah, let's do that.
All right. So how can families navigate the resistance and barriers they typically experience from treatment programs, like not being able to call your loved one or get any information on their progress or be part of their discharge plans when they finish treatment? Like, what do you think is appropriate for families to do, and how can they go about that?
Amanda, that question is so important. And sadly, it is the question that virtually all families, they never get any kind of satisfaction along these lines. They don't know how to navigate the resistance and the barriers that they experience from treatment programs. And I'll give you an example. And I've heard a lot of stories about the addiction treatment industry and about the conventional wisdom about addiction and recovery in American society these days. So I thought that there wasn't much that would shock and surprise me, but this one kind of blew me away. I got a call from a woman. She said, my husband has a severe alcohol use disorder, and yesterday he went away in an Uber, ostensibly being driven to a treatment program, but I don't know where he is now, and I don't know if it's legit, and I don't know how to get any information about his treatment or even if he's alive or dead.
Wow.
So I asked, well, how did this come about? And she explained, I had been expressing concern about his drinking for years now, and he's got cirrhosis of the liver. So it really has become a matter of life or death that he cannot drink anything at all. So there was a recent incident, and I expressed my concern again about seeing his drinking. And he said I would take care of it. All of a sudden, yesterday, he came up to me in the middle of the day and he said, I'm going to treatment. I'm getting picked up in 30 minutes and I'll let you know where I am. He told her where he was going, but I'll contact you as soon as I can. So, and then within 30 minutes, a Uber driver came up, and now the caller was in shock about all of this. And the patient really didn't know how to answer her questions. How long are you going to be there? He didn't know. He wasn't told. So he gets into this anonymous Uber car and he gets driven away. Oftentimes, family members do drive their loved one to treatment, but in this case, she didn't even have the opportunity to do that, to see where he was going
Right.
and to get some sense of the place. So after an hour and a half or 2 hours, she got a text message from her husband saying, well, I'm here. I'll talk to you as soon as I can, but it won't be for a while. That was the last that she had heard from him. It had been 24 hours. Yeah.
It's pretty stressful. I
Yeah.
would be like,
Yeah.
what, where are you? And, and typically you can't reply. They take your phone.
Right. Right. So presumably that had been what had happened, because he did text her saying, I'm here in the parking lot. I won't be able to call or contact you for some time. Don't worry. That was the last that she had heard of him. So then she described how she had reached out to the treatment program. She knew the name of it, but how he found it was not clearly known. Was it legitimate? That wasn't clearly known. So she had reached out, and she had sent a text message to this treatment program's website saying, my husband's had been admitted, but I don't know that for a fact. Can you please confirm that? Tell me anything about him. Please, I'm worried sick over him. So she got a response by text message saying, we're too busy to respond to you. We will reach out to you when we can. So then she writes back and she says, well, how can I get through to you? And they said the same thing. You can't get through to us, and we're too busy to talk to you.
Oh my gosh. And it was probably like an automatic message too.
Yeah, yeah.
What?
And so,
Yeah.
so we were thinking, well, gosh, when he wanted to gain admission, they sent an Uber to pick him up in 30 minutes. And they certainly, took his information via text message. So they had plenty of time for him when
Wow.
they was arranging to get admitted. But once he was there, they were not going to respond to her at all. She had then called in by phone and spoke to someone, explained her situation, and all they said was, we can't confirm or deny anything because of HIPAA regulations. Have a nice day.
Right. Patient privacy laws.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's what they all hide behind, which in some cases is legitimate. Well, it's always legitimate. HIPAA is always important, but most programs have no interest in finding a way to get a patient permission to have any kind of contact with the family. They don't believe in it. Not only are they lazy, but they don't think it's good. They don't think that it's helpful, and some places might think it's downright harmful.
Right.
So then she and I were working on, well, what can she do from here? So basically, I was informing her about certain support programs like alliesinrecovery.net and resthelps.org and Patrick at familyaddictioncoach.com. That's my email address.
Yes, it is.
It's my web address, familyaddictioncoaching.
Familyaddictioncoach.com.
Okay.
That's your web address. How did was she able to find out if her husband was there and how long he'd be there for or anything?
Not yet. But basically, I gave her a lot of information. I told her about the book, Get Your Loved One Sober, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I suggested, think, what would you do if you had word or reason to believe that your husband was in a general hospital in an ICU? You would call them they would always talk to you. If you said, my husband is in your ICU, they would find out some way to talk to you, right?
Right.
So just think about it as any kind of medical illness. And so when you get pushed away by the receptionist, then ask to speak to the nursing supervisor, ask to speak to the medical director of the program, ask to speak to the owner. Just keep going up the line and basically say, I need to give you information about my husband. It's a matter of life and death. How do I do that? How can you communicate with me? And you can't give up. You just have to be a pest and see if they will reply to you or arrange for some kind of communication between you and them and the patient. There's no guarantee that it's going to help,
Mm-hmm.
but sometimes when you approach in that way, sometimes you might find a compassionate, reasonable staff person who's willing to break their rules and then might ask your loved one, do you want to sign a release so we can talk to your spouse? And your loved one probably would do it.
Right. Or, let them know, we believe your spouse keeps calling. You should probably give them a call when you get a chance. Because I know that some places do allow phone time. I know that I was allowed an emergency call while I was in detox and wasn't allowed any calls while I was in rehab, but I had, my family was allowed to come and see me on the weekends. And I think that they gave them that information while I was there. But
yeah. You're an exceptional person, Amanda. Anybody who knows you knows that. You're one of a kind. You're an exceptional person. So I totally believe that you were thinking about your family while you were in treatment. Yet, if someone's feeling really sick, going through withdrawal, and then afterwards they're dealing with their emotions going all over the place. How many people are even going to have the wherewithal
right.
to think, my family wants to hear from me? I really ought to let them know what's going on. Most people, in my experience in treatment, they think their family wants nothing to do with them and wants a break from them, and they are too ashamed to reach out.
Yeah. And sometimes everything is on cell phones now. Like I wouldn't be able to remember half of the phone numbers that I would need to call. Like
Right.
if I were put in jail or the hospital or rehab today, I would only remember a couple numbers. But I do remember when I was admitted to a psychiatric hospital and they took me off all my medication and I didn't want to call. I don't think I called my parents for 4 or 5 days. They were in the dark that one time. I was definitely not thinking about that. I was sick. I didn't want to get out of the bed or anything like
Right.
that. So yeah, I can understand, somebody, especially going through detox or whatnot. The last thing on your mind is calling somebody.
Yeah. Being in treatment is really tough. It's really challenging. At most places, it's really hard and it's really painful. It's not a vacation. It's not Club Med.
Right.
Although we've got that image in our minds, someone goes away to 30 days to Malibu or something.
Yeah, and they're riding horses in the sunset.
Yeah. And maybe some places do that, but virtually all patients who are involved in treatment, it's really hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not able to really think all that clearly.
No, it's jarring too. Just being someplace completely different. Suddenly you have roommates. Sometimes you have 30 roommates. And then you learn that you're on a very rigid schedule. I know the place that I went to for detox, their residential rehab part of the hospital was full schedule from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. They kept you super, super busy. But it's not.
That must have been exhausting.
Yeah. Luckily, I didn't have to go through that, but a lot of people do and are, and just the whole experience is quite a lot to take in. It saved my life, and I would never deter anybody from going to rehab, but it's different. sometimes just being able to catch your breath and call your family takes a couple days.
Yeah, yeah, and Amanda, from what I know of you, you were ready when you got treatment. You were ready for it, and you were determined to make use out of it, and you were single-minded, and you had a lot of strengths. Even with drug use and addiction, you still had a lot of strengths. So that really boded. I can't think of what to say, but that's okay. I'll just have to cut it out. That was really useful for you.
Yeah.
Not everybody has that.
Yeah, not everybody goes in that way.
Right. Let me tell you, if I may, one of the things that families can really use help with is when they run up against that stone wall from the treatment program. And on occasion, families will ask me to serve as a interface to communicate information to the treatment program where their loved one is, and to give collateral information. When I'm working with families, I find out different perspectives, and oftentimes I have information that the person with the addiction is not aware of because they haven't been paying attention to their surroundings sometimes, or maybe they're, for other reasons, they're unaware of it. But when families have asked me to do that, it can be very helpful. And especially, you mentioned something about discharge planning and treatment planning. A lot of programs, if you don't speak up, they will get as much money out of the insurance company to keep you in that residential program, then they'll discharge you when the insurance says no more, and as if you're cured, uh, and that the treatment is over, and they'll just send you home sometimes without even notifying family.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, a patient arrives home at the doorstep, and the family is totally surprised. So what we've learned is that it's so important. And if I ever get involved, I insist that a residential program schedules appointments for people to pursue aftercare, which is generally, most times, it's needed after the intensive residential program, because these are chronic illnesses, and the recovery from these illnesses takes a long time. It doesn't take a matter of days, and it's not done once the withdrawal process is finished, but there's a real rehabilitation and a healing recovery part that can last for months, maybe even years. So we always insist that they develop a good discharge plan for post-discharge, that they schedule appointments before the patient leaves the hospital, and that the family is aware of them and knows and has guidance about what they should do if the person maybe resumes use or is in fear of resuming use, or some disaster might happen. How can the family best respond? So that's one way that families say that I've been really helpful to them, to get that kind of information from a treatment program that they can't get on their own.
So you'd recommend, if somebody was looking for a treatment program, to find out if that program offered like IOP and scheduling afterwards. And if they don't, then to look into that to continue treatment after inpatient.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. And to get details. And for example, what is your family program? Many places, 30-day programs, all they do is they'll have family come out towards the tail end, and they go through these canned exercises with other families. There's nothing individualized about the family weekends. And so it's also important to ask about individualized treatment planning, and also how the program communicates with family members. How do they accept input or information from the family? How do they communicate? And really get very specific about it. There was one program that I worked in where basically every week I was expected to meet with the family without fail, and then bring information into the treatment team about the family's perspective, and also about planning for discharge, and what can we do with the home environment that will facilitate someone's recovery. what are things happening that might be a deterrent or not facilitate the recovery. So there are programs that will have weekly family meetings and are so insistent upon it that you basically have to do it as part of the treatment. So
Yeah.
it's important to get specifics.
That sounds pretty amazing that they had that program.
Yeah, it was. It was a great place to train. And that's how I've learned everything that I've learned about the importance of involving family in treatment. And it's, all these years later, it still holds true.
Yeah, those are great questions too. I mean, I'm full of questions and always have a list before I call anything, but I've never thought about those questions. Like, what is your family plan and how do you communicate with the family members? It's really, it's really good.
It's really key.
Mm-hmm.
What we find is that a lot of websites for treatment programs, they will claim to have evidence-based practices and such. But then, and if you're savvy, you look at some of the things they're talking about, like equine therapy, for example. Equine therapy, if you love horses, I suppose it could be helpful and fun and encouraging, but it's not been evidence-based to show being useful in recovery from addiction. But a lot of programs will state that and state that they do this, that they do that, because they've learned the buzzwords. And so they claim that. But when you ask them, well, does your staff have degrees? And what are the minimum level of training that you require for people to work in your program? You may hear a very different story.
Yeah, that's a really good question also. I don't even think a lot of people really understand what evidence-based treatment is.
Right. It gets thrown around so much that it's become useless. It's only used to, it's like smoke and mirrors. These programs, they put evidence-based and, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is an evidence-based approach and that has proven to be useful in treating addiction. And that's all true. But how the program implements it and what that means in terms of their programming and their support it's totally up in the air. It's not like they have to back it up with anything.
Right. And I mean, I think a lot of people, when I hear evidence-based, I just think, well, it's based on evidence. But how often do people think, well, what kind of evidence is it based on?
Right. Right. Similarly, some places purport to have very high outcomes, success stories, like 90% of people who go through their programs are still in recovery and abstinent a year later.
But are they self-reported studies?
Yeah.
Read about that.
Yeah. And then if you learn more, that you learn that they don't do follow-up with people who leave the program prematurely, that leave before the end of the 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
So that excludes a whole population of people who are dissatisfied with the treatment that they're receiving.
Yeah.
So it's usually sketchy.
And it's really important to ask a lot of questions. And you gave a lot of good questions for people to ask. So that'll help.
Thank you, Amanda.
So you want to wrap it up and tell people again how they can find you?
Well, I think I interrupted you with a yeah. So here's your cue again.
All right, so let's wrap it up and tell people how they can find you.
My website is familyaddictioncoach.com. I've got information on there that can be very useful about craft and other approaches. We also have a podcast series called the Family Addiction Coaching Podcast, and that's available at iTunes, on Google Podcasts, and anywhere else you can find podcasts. People can reach me directly at patrick@familyaddictioncoach.com. People can follow me on Twitter. My handle is @PatrickDoyle_35.
And you're very active on there too if people want to follow you.
Yes, I try to be, but I try to make it useful material and not spam.
Right. No, there's never any spam coming from your Twitter. It's all useful stuff.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Family Addiction Coaching. And if you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show. We'll continue to interview interesting and strong families as long as there is a need for this information in the community. make sure to visit our website, www.opioidcoaching.com. If you think you might want professional coaching for yourself or your family, Patrick Doyle is available. Have a peaceful day.